Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofoutlander.com for all things Outlander, from the Dinah Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is episode 57, Voyager Read-Along, week 15. Hey, welcome back. What a week this has been. First we had a time change and we had our presidential election. So, if you're feeling a little down, if you're feeling a little excited, if you're not sure how you feel about it, I'm glad you're here. This will be a little respite in the wildness that was this week. So there is some news that came out of Outlander World this week. We've had 3 more Season 3 cast members being announced. Geneva Dunsany, played by Hannah James, and her sister Isabel, by Tanya Reynolds. And also, young Jamie Murray has been cast, and it's Connor McCary. And he's the boy who took over as Laird of Lollybrock in the deed of Saeson that Jamie signed the night before Culloden. So some important people are on board now. And the other big news is that Caitríona Balfe won the TV series Actress Award for the BAFTA Scotland, which is equivalent to our Academy Awards. So that's fantastic for her. Congratulations, Caitríona. And Sam Heughan was also nominated for TV series actor, but he did not win this year, sadly. Sorry, Sam. You're amazing. We look forward to your future nominations and wins. They are coming. The other thing that happened in Outlander World is there has been incidences of online bullying, in particular those who are friends or perhaps love interests of Sam Heughan. It is unconscionable behavior. We do not own Sam Heughan. We do not see the same behavior for any of the other actors or actresses of Outlander. Caitríona Balfe is allowed to have her private life, and people give her space. And Sam Heughan is no different. It doesn't matter that he plays one of the most beloved characters. He is not Jamie Fraser in real life. He is Sam. He has a family. He has friends. And it doesn't matter who he dates or doesn't date. And it's really horrifying to me that adult people can't seem to see past a TV or a book character and the real person behind it. So Sam, thank you for speaking out against bullying, and if you ever hear this or listen, there's a whole lot of us who were on your side and want you to have your own life. So, outside of that, let's get to the podcast. I did get some love from a listener. Her name was Dolly, and she just sent me this note. Just a short note to say thank you for the podcast. I listen to it every week and totally enjoy it. I was not familiar with Outlander until 3 years ago when I saw the first trailer on Starz, and I am hooked. I have not read any of the books, but read most of the synopsis online, and when I learned about your podcast, I am hooked listening to it, and I've cried and laughed listening. I love Jamie and Claire's characters and the other characters as well. Thank you, Dolly. I appreciate you listening. And I hope at some point you will read all the books. You will definitely have a leg up when you start reading them. The show is quite a bit different than the books. And right now we're in book verse. And we will be moving into TV show verse sometime in the next 5-6 months. I appreciate you and thank you for listening and supporting my efforts. I did have somebody else message me this week and asked if I was ever going to be charging for the episodes. The answer is no. This is a tremendous amount of work per episode. However, I think it should be free. And that's how it will go. And if any of you feel led to financially support the show through Patreon, more power to you. And I will say thank you very much. Or if you choose to support the show by putting reviews into iTunes, or I appreciate you and your efforts on my behalf. And if you simply will tune in week after week and you'll share the show, that is enough for me. This is a labor of Outlander love, and as I've said many times in the past, I brought 2 cats, a refrigerator, and Outlander to my marriage, which this week will be 22 years. I still have the refrigerator, and I still have the husband, and I still have Outlander, so all is well. Thank you very much. So we're going to be looking at the beginning of Part 8, chapters 40 and 41. It looks like on the surface that there's not as much in these chapters, but this is where we're starting to build foundation again as the story moves forward. We've come off of Jamie becoming free of Leary, and the settlement was signed, but he has to come up with the official amount of a crap ton of money for her, for the settlement. Well, they went looking for that money in the Silky's Island treasure box that Jamie had found way back when he was in Ardsmuir, and they'd been using it off and on over the years for specific purposes. Well, when they went, they had young Ian to be the swimmer because Leary, of course, had shot Jamie and he could not swim with an arm that is just healed from a serious infection and a gunshot wound. And as they were there, not only does the treasure get taken, but young Ian gets taken as well and is spirited off in a ship that I don't know where it's going or where it came from or what the name is. So this is where we begin chapter 40, which is I Shall Go Down to the Sea. Now, one of the things that we have learned about Jamie throughout the books up till now is that he gets incredibly bad seasickness. It is his Achilles heel. That is his weak point in life. He is not a seaman. He will never make an avid sailor. Poor man. And I love that he has something that cripples him to the point of incapacity because that gives him dimension and reality. So Jamie and Claire decided that they are going to continue from Inverness into France, going to Le Havre, where Cousin Jared is. Remember him from book 2? And he has a thriving wine merchant business. So we have him. He has his own ships. He has property in the West Indies. So he knows how to identify different ships, and he can help them track down, probably, unless this was a pirated ship, where it's going and where it came from. We find Claire and Jamie already with Cousin Jared when this starts. So they've had their channel crossing, and Jared, who's now over 70, proclaims that it must be the Artemis. And at first glance, it seems like that's the name of the ship that took young Ian. But we have to go further. And they talk about how it's a mid-sized ship with a crew of about 40, and that Jamie and Claire can take it to look for young Ian. And Jamie is happy. He would rather take one of Jared's ships and a captain that he knows because size does not matter. And Jared gives him an eye and says the weather is going to be problematic because of the time of year, and that size very well indeed could matter. Jamie, as we know, like I talked about a second ago, gets terribly seasick, and he's completely taken out by it. He vomits, he's prone. So Claire says she is going to go with him and needs to find an apothecary shop to build her doctoring supplies. And they're looking at a week to prepare before the sea journey begins. And then Jamie asks Jared about how long it will take to get to the West Indies, and in this asking, he is incredibly tense, and Claire thinks he'll stay that way until they find young Ian. And Jared replies that it'll be possibly 3 or more months, even though in good weather it should only take 2 months. The season is late, and there's going to be a series of serious storms likely. And through their conversations, they believe the ship that has taken young Ian is called the Bruja. And then Jared asks Jamie again to recount his description of the ship. And based on this, they believe the ship is leaving port and going back to her home base. And Jared has sent messages to all the major port cities in case the Bruja may have left port from there in hopes of finding the exact location where the ship is going. Thank goodness for Jamie's memory. And it's funny because Claire can recall clinical things, plants, medicines, surgeries, protocols. But Jamie could remember exactly what that ship looked like, and Claire said it was this big with a blue stripe. Different memory recall for different things. They're a good team. And they decide to go back to Jared's house for the night, and they're escorted by his men with torches and clubs. It's a dangerous city after dark, especially for a wealthy wine merchant. As they head back toward Jared's house, Claire finds her spirits rising, though she's exhausted from the journey, all the ill smells of the harbor, and her hunger is intense. All because, with Jared's help, they at least have a chance at finding young Ian. And as they're back at the house, and they're discussing the situation, Cousin Jared believes if young Ian hadn't been killed right away, they would likely keep him alive, because he could be sold at a slave market or into indentured servitude in the West Indies for a tidy sum of money, somewhere around £200, which would be an incredible amount of money then. And if they are correct about where the brouhaha is going, and they intend to make a profit on young Ian, he should be fairly easy to find. There'll be a paper trail. Except with the dangerous season, both ships had to make it there in the first place, is what Claire is thinking, and no one is saying. Claire is finding the increasing rain upon the slate roof to feel threatening and not soothing as it ought to be. We keep going back to these water references. They are strong in these sections of the book. And as I've said the last couple of podcasts, water does several different things. It cleans, it renews, it blesses, it also alters course. It also can drown. So when we think of that, where does that fit here? And I think she's feeling like she's drowning. And she's trying to sleep at this point, and she can't. And she's endlessly worrying about the horrible seas that lie ahead. And she's happy that only she is being kept awake because Jamie stayed down with Jared and they're talking about all the arrangements that have to be made. And she thinks that Jared was willing to risk one of his ships and a captain to help in the search. Jamie was going to be the supercargo. He's the man who oversees the loading, unloading, the sale, and disposition of the cargo. And the supercargo is solely in charge of it. And if needed, he can even overrule the captain to keep it safe. And Jared is a savvy businessman. He looked at it as an opportunity to make some money, and he arranged for a miscellaneous cargo to go to Jamaica, and they would make the return trip with rum from the Fraser AC plantation. So he's really wise. He's not simply going to put his ship at risk. He's going to find a way to monetize it for himself. And Claire observed that Jared was risking a small portion of his fortune, and they were risking their actual lives. It's a big distinction. He could survive with the ship going down, or the loss of the cargo. It would hurt, but he would recover. They could lose their lives in this venture. And she's still unable to sleep. Her mind is racing. So she gets out of bed and wraps in a quilt. And she stands at the window and looks out at the harbor and can see ships in the water swaying with the sea below them and the storm around them. In a week, she would be on one of them. How scary do you think that must be? I can't imagine the prospect of a late season voyage across the Atlantic. That sounds like a horrible idea. When my husband was 6 or 7 years old, they were coming back from England. His father had been stationed there. And in January, on the USS United States, very large ship, they crossed the North Atlantic into New York City, back into the United States. I don't know if you could get me on a ship to cross the North Atlantic in, say, June. But the idea of doing it in January, wow, that's a really terrifying prospect. I think that sailors are very brave people. So Jamie would have use of the Artemis for about 3 months prior to the return trip date, when the weather became more safe for the return voyage. And that way he could use that time if they didn't find young Ian right away. They would have that time to solely be looking at him, and they could be making money using the ship themselves, moving cargo in between the islands. And then she goes on this brain squirrel where she's pondering all the things that have transpired since she returned and found Jamie. Well, she got through the stones and found him, and she had some time to contemplate being a printer's wife, and then being part of a dangerous and fugitive existence as a smuggler's lady, and finally, perhaps, the busy but settled life of a Highland farm. what she had already known and loved before. And all of those different scenarios quickly changed to her new reality with Jamie, and now they're here. All those things were torn away, all within 10 days, 12 days, very quickly. And now she finds herself with another unknown future lying ahead. And the truth is, she's not distressed. She's actually excited. She had been settled for 20 years with Frank and Brianna. To her patients, she felt like a barnacle, and those were her attachments. And now she's ripped free by fate and her own actions. Does Claire really believe in fate? I don't think so. And she feels like she's tumbling free in the surf at the mercy of forces stronger than she. So we find the sea references deep here. She's already preparing, I think, unconsciously for the journey. And she's putting her ducks in order. This is something Claire would do before a surgery. Calms and talks herself through it. When she's making any preparations for something, she gets into that mind and stays there. And so Claire is already on that ship a week from now. She's trying to process it and be good with it by the time they get there. And I think it will lower her fear and any anxiety that she might have. It will help her feel fortified to move forward. Do you do any of that in your own personality? Because she just gets her lists. She gets into the mindset and she goes. When she makes decisions, they're firm, fast decisions. She goes with it. She makes it, she does it. And as she's standing here, her breath had frosted the window, and she made a heart, as she had done so many times, thinking of Brianna. B-E-R. Brianna Ellen Randall. And would she still call herself Randall? Or would she go by Fraser now? Claire's brain is hopping. But this is what we do oftentimes when we're dealing with some really significant stress, is our brains will just be processing and processing. And part of that, we'll throw a bunch of other things in at the same time. It's not a straight line. And then inside the heart, she drew 2 letters, J and C. Jamie returns to the room, and he asks, "You're still awake?" I know we've all done that. We feel dumb every time. It was the rain, she said. So that water is making change. And she moves and she hugs him, and he's warm and solid. And he smells of seasickness faintly, but more of candle wax and ink. And he's surprised when she asks if he's been writing. And he says, "How did you know?" Because he smells of ink. "You've a nose as keen as a truffle pig's, Sassenach." What a compliment. "Thank you." And his face darkens, and turns out he's writing that letter to Jenny to tell her what happened to her son. Imagine the difficulty. I know we've all had to give terrible news to people, and then you couldn't pick up a phone. You couldn't do any of that. You had to write a letter, and it could take months to get there. He waited to write to her until after he had a solid plan in place, and he could tell her all about it. And he's really quite glad that he'll be out to sea when she gets it. Who wouldn't want to be out of the way when Jenny finds out that her son has been abducted? He's thankful to be done with the letter. It was weighing on him heavily. And Claire says, "You told her the truth?" "I always have," is his response. And then Claire thinks, well, except about me. And that's as she's undoing his hair. So she asks where Jared put Willoughby. And Jamie thinks he'll be sleeping in the stable, because nobody in the household could handle having his heathen self in the house. And as they're talking, Jamie notices the heart on the window and asks what it is. And Claire says, "Oh, it's silliness." And he reaches for her hand and caresses the small J scar. And he says he didn't ask if she even wanted to go with him after young Ian. She could stay here with Jared, or in Paris, or go back to Lollybrock even. "No, you didn't ask because you knew bloody well what the answer would be." Ah, Claire. Just like young Ian did not put the saddle on Donis for Jamie to leave when Hobart was coming because he knew what the answer would be, Jamie didn't ask because he knew exactly what Claire would say. but she already told Jared she was going with him. And they smiled at each other, and this seemed to relieve Jamie a bit. His countenance became less stressed, just a little bit, and he kissed the palm of her hand gently. And though the wind still whistled and the rain battered the window, Claire could now sleep. Into the unknown she could go with Jamie because he is her other half. He is the known regardless of what else is going on. They're in their space together. Now they are whole. They make one hell of a one. It's a lot better than their two halves when they're apart from each other. In the morning, the sky is clear, and she comments that even though it's still cold, that Jared's Le Havre house is 3 stories of timbered warmth. It's a sturdy, good house. And she's sitting in his study with her feet warmed by the fire, and she's list-making what she might need for a 2-month voyage. But it could be 3 or more. And she thinks distilled alcohol is at the top of her medical necessities, and Jared had promised her a cask. Jamie told her they needed to label it something else or the sailors would drink it all before they even left port. Her list also includes purified lard, St. John's wort, garlic, yarrow, borage, which is bug loss, if I'm pronouncing that right. And she was thinking how slow this process was for her because she's trying to recall the common herbs and some uncommon ones to make up her doctor's kit, because she used to know them quite well. And she starts thinking of her hospital days where she had occasionally used herbals with modern patients, to the horror and skepticism of her colleagues. But it's true, most things you would never substitute for herbs in the modern world as she knew the 20th century. Even though they worked quite well, in the 20th century, people wanted to make sure it was going to work. There'd be no question. And she thinks that she had forgotten much, but as she wrote, the look and the smell of each came back to her. It's that photographic memory Claire seems to have, where even if she hides it away someplace deep, once she starts working with it, it pours out. I don't think she ever really forgets anything. And she looks up and she sees Jamie struggling to write his own list because of his crippled right hand. He asks her to add lime juice to her list, and they decide that she'll be the ship surgeon and he'll also be the purser because they didn't have anybody to fill those spots. And she's a doctor and a surgeon. She'll do well by them. And they are interrupted by Josephine, one of the women who work for Jared. And she says there's a visitor who's asking for Jamie, but she has this look on her face that she's not really happy about this visitor, and she thinks he's iffy. And Jamie looks out the window, and it's the coin dealer, but he is a disheveled mess. They remark how he's bearded, and he's wearing a yarmulke. He's obviously Jewish. And Claire notices his beautiful blue eyes. His name is Meyer. He was already in the city, so he could come quickly, but he came from Frankfurt. And he, surprisingly, accepts wine from Jamie. Or he accepts wine from Jamie after being surprised he was asked if he would like some. He begins to unpack the items he had brought with him. Rare coins. Jared had told him Jamie wanted to inspect Greek and Roman rarities. And Jamie explains he asked to see him to compare Meyer's stock with the coins Jamie has seen, and if he might know who purchased such coins around 20 years ago. He will cover his travel expenses and pay for his time, but he's not looking to buy. Meyer was quite astonished, and Jamie says he knows Meyer's family is most knowledgeable, and might he also know of those in the West Indies who might be knowledgeable as well. He took in all that Jamie said and then proceeded. His father or uncle would have sold those coins, but he has the catalog of records. Jamie tells him which coins and how many he had seen, and in about another 15 minutes, the business was complete. He consulted his scrolls, and since they sell in confidence, and he can tell him they sold X coins in X year, and usually no more, but the original buyer is dead, and it's been a long time, so maybe. Then he reveals who the original buyer was, and it's none other than Clarence Marylebone, the Duke of Sandringham. And Claire explains, Sandringham? Of course she does. She sits quiet this whole proceedings of these rare coins, and then she has to yell, Sandringham! Claire knew the Duke was dead at the hand of Jamie's godfather, Murtaugh. She remembers his last moment of intense surprise. And then Meyer reveals that when his uncle purchased the Duke's collection after his death, some of the coins were missing. And Jamie cheers to Meyer and his wee book. So they've gotten some pretty interesting and applicable information. And as Meyer readies to leave, he says goodbye to Claire, and she has to ask if Meyer is really his only name. He explains that the Jews of Frankfurt are not allowed to use their family names, but his neighbors call after them for an old red shield painted on the front of their house. Beyond that, they have no name. And then Josephine comes and escorts Meyer out. And Jamie's in thought and says, well, Godspeed to you, Meyer Redshield. And Claire asks if Jamie speaks German. Didn't she know he spoke German before? Maybe not. So Claire asks Jamie if he knows German. And she asked what Redshield would be in German. Rothschild, Sassenach. Why? Just a thought. I suppose everyone has to start somewhere. Yes, it's those Rothschilds. The Rothschild family is a wealthy family descending from Meyer Amschel Rothschild, a court Jew to the German Landgraves of Hesse-Kassel in the Free City of Frankfurt, who established his banking business in the 1760s. I loved this nod of history right here. I mean, for Diana to bring in the Rothschilds patriarch, phenomenal. That little piece of writing is beautiful. Next we see Claire singing Yo Ho Ho and a Bottle of Rum, 15 Men on a Dead Man's Chest. She's talking about the Duke, of course, and wonders if the Silky's treasure was really his. Jamie thinks it's likely, and Jamie also thinks it's most likely the person who retrieved the treasure via the Bruja is most likely the person who put it there. Definitely some Jacobite. So they're trying to figure out all these little trails and how they fit together. They discuss in detail the value of the coins and if those coins could have possibly produced 50,000 pounds before Culloden. Could this be the 50,000 pounds the Duke had promised to the Stuarts if the Bonnie Prince would retake the English throne? There's no way of knowing if that was the offer that ultimately sent Charlie on his ill-fated venture. He went to Scotland with no more than 6 companions, 2,000 Dutch broadswords, and several casks of brandy wine with which to charm the Highland chieftains. The moneys had never been received by Charlie because the Duke died before he had reached England. They speculate on how that money would have changed the outcome of the Scottish Rebellion. And then Claire thinks 20 years should have taught her not to play what if. And her passing thought about her and Brianna dying in childbed goes unsupported. In the 20th century, she delivered full term without complications. We never know what the risk factors were, and I really think she was called high risk because of her mental state and her malnourishment, not because there was anything wrong with the pregnancy, there was anything wrong with the birth. And I think she could have easily done that in the 18th century as well. Or possibly she was considered high risk because she had had the abruption with Faith. But we never get that explanation, so we don't know. So as far as it looks in the books, and from my clinical vantage point, it looks like her pregnancy with Brianna was very normal, healthy, straightforward, and full term. And there was no problems. So her mental health and her prior pregnancy likely were the issue, and that wouldn't have affected her likely in the 18th century. I really think it's her way of not feeling guilty for leaving Jamie and going through the stones. It's a truth in quotation marks that she holds on to in order to placate herself that it was the right decision because she didn't want to leave. Even though it was the right thing to do, she would have stayed no matter what. So what do you think about that? And as she's going through all of this in her mind, Jamie's also in his own thoughts, thinking about the possible value of the coins. And then Claire asks if Duncan Kerr, he's the one who was ranting and raving and died, but where Jamie got the information about the treasure. He was, but he thinks it's an awkward kind of fortune to be paying troops with. But it was portable and easy to hide, and it would be smart for the treasonous Duke to get monies to the Stuart cause undetected. And if one already had a collection as this, nobody would think it odd or unusual for you to be buying more. So this small portable box of rare coins is a great cover. Then they wonder, why did Duncan Kerr spill the beans 10 years later? What happened to him? Had he left the treasure on the island himself? And who sent the Bruja after it? So many unanswered questions. And they decide that they have more time to talk about it while at sea and to speculate as much as they want, but now they need to go to Paris. So when they're in Paris, Claire goes searching for an apothecary shop. She's looking for Master Raymond, but he hasn't been heard of for years. He's been gone. So she asks around for another good place to purchase from. The man she inquires with asks if she wants to sell Willoughby. Claire thanks him for the information and says no to that sale. Thank goodness Willoughby doesn't understand French. Gosh, think of that time. And that young Ian could be sold into servitude or slavery, and that somebody's willing just to buy a Chinese man. That's beyond horrible. The idea of buying and selling humans is morally reprehensible. And yes, I know it happens still in this world. I know there's fears of that in this world. And I hope someday all humans are seen as full humans. And I know this is something that really strikes close to Claire's heart, and we'll see it more and more as we get into this book. So they made their way to the other apothecary. It's Krasner's Emporium. And when they're there, Willoughby begins to tell her about all these different uses of different items that they find there. And he used to know healers. So he's very knowledgeable, and Claire is learning from him. And after their shopping trip, the weather is so lovely and mild for December, they decide to walk back to Jared's house. And then Claire observes that as they're outside, others are also taking advantage of the beautiful weather. There are vendors, beggars, prostitutes, shop girls, and others. Thanks, Claire. We always have to give a nod to the prostitutes. And as they're walking, they get to a corner, and she spies Reverend Campbell. And she says hi to him, and it pretty much startles him. And as they're chatting, you could tell that Reverend Campbell does not like Willoughby. And Claire asks about his travels, and he explains they are the same, but he had urgent business in Paris first. Keep your eye on Reverend Campbell. There's a reason he popped up here. Whenever something seems out of place, note it. Put a pin in that sucker. And then Claire asks after his sister, and he says she is much improved with the remedies that Claire prescribed. And Claire hopes that she travels really well, and they part ways. And then Willoughby has some very negative things to say about the Reverend. Says he is not a holy man, and that Willoughby has seen him at Madame Jean's, and he wasn't respectful or kind. And when they get back to Jared's, Claire shares with Jamie about running in with Reverend Campbell, but not about Willoughby's impression or what he says. And Claire thinks that she should have asked Reverend Campbell exactly where he's going to be, because even though he's not great company, it might be good to have a contact that she knows. And Jared says he's already made up a list of contacts and has sent letters ahead telling them about Jamie and Claire coming to the West Indies. And so he's already putting people in contact with them. And then Jamie says something odd to Jared, and Claire is really curious. And then they have this continuing bizarre exchange. And Claire is wondering what the heck is going on, and it turns out that it's Freemason talk. Jared has to make sure that Jamie was also a Freemason because he couldn't put him in contact in the West Indies without knowing for sure. And then Claire was really surprised that she didn't know that Jamie was a Freemason. Well, nobody's supposed to know if you're a Freemason. And as the conversation moved back to general things, Claire is reminded that there are things she doesn't know about Jamie, that there's a gap of time, that they're apart. And she used to be able to say she knew him as well as one person could know another. And this makes her very uncomfortable, and it brings out her insecurities about all the things that she doesn't know. And she reflects on the thought that there are times now when they're together that he was as clear to her as the lead crystal glass. And then there were times where she would stumble over unsuspected parts of his past, or see him thinking, knowing he's recollecting memories that she doesn't know about. This leaves her feeling alone and unsure. It's not insurmountable, But even though they feel like the perfect puzzle piece fit, there was a lot of time where they weren't together. And there was a lot of life that was lived that they did not share. So she's still insecure. She feels like there's parts of him that are not open to her right now. And just as she's feeling terrible, he presses his foot against hers in a reassuring way and gives her a silent, knowing toast. And then her brain wanders to their wedding night, when there was nothing between them but a contract and honesty. "There are things you maybe canna tell me," he had said. "I will not ask you or force you. But when you do tell me something, let it be the truth. There is nothing between us now but respect. And respect has room for secrets, I think, but not for lies." Oh, sigh. Did anybody ovulate in listener land hearing those words again? Jamie is definitely a linguist. And as she's thinking this, she drank deeply from her cup, and their gaze is eye to eye, and they're totally ignoring Cousin Jared rambling on, something about biscuits. And then he nudges her foot again, and she answered back. She is home. So did he read her insecurities? Again, she's supposed to have a glass face. So he must have noticed the shadow cross over her. And he took care of it right away. He wanted to give her that assurance. So they bid Jared good night. And Claire stands, and she's a bit giddy and lightheaded. They look into each other's eyes, and there's a perfect understanding. There was more than respect between them now, and room for all their secrets to be known in good time. So it came full circle immediately, and she wasn't able to drift in that insecurity, and he answered it back. So now that all those things are cleared away that she didn't know initially, the very important things, Claire is zooming in on her. Jamie is zooming in on her, and he's able to look at her fully. And he's able to interpret what she's doing because he's not preoccupied with not telling her about Leary. So we're seeing their relationship reforming and putting layers back in and getting stronger. But I think her insecurities are very normal and commonplace, and I think he probably has them too, but we see more of her vantage point than his. And the morning brought errands for Jamie and Jared, and Claire decided she was going to go looking for the only other person she had left in Paris. And Claire went looking for the only other person she had left in Paris that she cared for deeply, because she may never be in France or Europe again. I mean, Master Raymond was one of those people, but he's gone. So away she goes to Hôpital des Anges. She's going to see Mother. And we see her in the small convent cemetery, and the stone in front of her simply reads Faith. She brought a pink tulip to place upon that stone. And it's a difficult flower to find that time of year, but Jared had his own conservatory. And as she touches the petals, it's like she's stroking a baby's cheek. That makes me want to sob, picturing her over this simple stone. And a little while later she says, "I thought I wouldn't cry." And she feels the weight of Mother Hildegarde's hand upon her head. And Claire says she's surprised because it was so long ago. She has put that piece of her away so deeply. And when she was with Frank those 20 years and had Brianna, do you think she ever told him about Faith? I don't know. I mean, she probably told her physician who was treating her pregnancy, but it makes me wonder if he ever knew that deep loss and hurt that she had. Or did she keep it away so it was something that was only hers and Jamie's that he didn't have to share? Because he got to share Brianna for sure. And Mother Hildegarde, in her wisdom, tells her that time doesn't really exist for mothers in regard to their children. And she talks about how mothers look at their children and it's a blink of an eye. And they can see them in any state of who they are or were. It's thoughtful and it's beautiful. And you can really tell that Diana Gabaldon gets it. And Claire says, especially when they're asleep. You can always see the baby then. Do any of you ever watch your kids sleep? I have teenagers and young adults. And I do. I go peek on them. And they do remind me of when they were babies and toddlers. But yet they're these giant young men who are far taller than I am. Taller than my husband now. And Mother Hildegarde says she thought Claire had the look of one who had more children after Faith. And Claire wants to know how Mother Hildegarde knows so much about mothers and children. The old require very little sleep. I walk the wards at night sometimes. The patients talk to me. While Mother Hildegarde is talking, Claire describes the changes that she sees in Mother Hildegarde's appearance and size, but that she is erect and firm in tread. Even though she has a walking stick, she commands it. She doesn't lean on it. And as they walk through the cemetery, Claire notices more stones and asks if they're children of the nuns. And Mother simply says, "It happens." How much do you love Mother Hildegarde? I just want to keep her, take her everywhere with me. She can come live in my house. And they see this section that's only for the sisters and for who the sisters love. This area happens to be for the sisters and for who the sisters love. And Claire notices many boutons, stones. The dogs are who Mother Hildegarde loves, and they get a place in the sisters' cemetery. I love that. She's on bouton 16. They stroll some more, and they go inside together. Mother is so happy to see Claire, ma chère, and offers to find her useful things for her journey. And Claire starts to ask Mother Hildegarde a question. And before Claire can get the whole question out, Mother Hildegarde finishes it and says she is 83. And she glances back at the graveyard and says, "Not yet. The good Lord knows there is much work to be done." This must be some comforting closure for Claire. She doesn't ask Jamie to go with her. She needed to go see Faith and make sure it was still there. And Faith is still her daughter, though she was born sleeping. She's a part of her. And for Claire to be able to actively respond to that and to actively feel that is a gift, because she couldn't do that all those years. It was something that she had to keep deeply hidden, completely away from everyone else. I'm glad Claire got some comfort here and got to find her peace and her anchor in Paris. Now we step into chapter 41. We set sail. They set sail on a cold, gray day in December. Are there any other kind in Scotland in December? She takes in the sights and the smells and sounds in her clinical Claire manner. It's been nearly a month since young Ian had been taken, and here they were in Scotland, no more than a few miles from the Silkies Island. How frustrating, how slow things are. I mean, I think they were pretty quick at getting all of this together for that time of year and for the situation. Jamie was like a caged animal. He was walking up and down the dock while Claire sat in the tap room. The journey from France back to Scotland was terrible for him, once again, and she knew he must be dreading months at sea. His frustration at how long it took to leave also was taking a toll on him. She often awoke to him gone walking the streets of Le Havre at night. They stopped at Cape Wrath to retrieve Fergus, and also a small group of smugglers that Jamie had sent Fergus to get. Jamie wanted to make sure they had some trusted men with them, not knowing what they would find in the Indies. What if they had to go up against pirates? He wants to fight alongside people he knows. The men of the Artemis didn't care at all about the extra weight. They were in a pothouse drinking while Jamie paced. Fergus was very late. But only Jamie and the captain were annoyed by it. When Jamie came into the tap room here and there to warm up, he asked Claire what the strong-smelling stuff is she's working with. She tells him it's ginger, and it helps with nausea. And so he picks up the bowl and inhales deeply and then sneezes. She tells him it's not like snuff. You have to drink it in a tea. Silly man. Everyone assures Claire that even the most green hands normally feel better in a few days at sea. Jared said the same thing to Jamie. Maybe it will be so, but she's not quite sure that he's going to get better on his own. The smugglers that Jamie knows start to appear the next day, but no Fergus. He was told that Fergus had some business to attend to, and Jamie can't quite wrap his head around Fergus having extra business he didn't send him on. And that day wore on and still no Fergus. And Claire's thinking about how close Jamie and Fergus are. Jamie doesn't do anything important without him. And the only time that they were apart is when Jamie was in prison and in England. And at that time, Fergus stayed at Lallybroch, and he was like a big brother to young Ian, and Jenny like a mother to him. But all in all, Jamie had been the father figure for Fergus this whole time. And it came down to it that it was time to actually set sail, and there was still no Fergus. The ship readied to depart. Claire tries to take Jamie below to give him a brew to settle his stomach. Then they hear hoofbeats before they can see the horse, and it's Fergus. But they're already casting off. And of course, Claire has a poem for the occasion. And as soon as the ship is in motion, Jamie becomes instantly ill. Mr. Willoughby has a cure, but Jamie doesn't want anything to do with it. All of a sudden, Jamie exclaimed. And now on the deck is not only Fergus, but Marcely McKimmie too. She's Leary's daughter. So this is the woman that Fergus wants to marry. Jamie is angrily asking questions, and Fergus says they are married. Jamie starts to lose it. What do you mean married? Have you bedded her? Fergus says no. Marcely says yes. He yells for the captain to return to shore, but they cannot. They're already in the tide race, and the ship is faster and faster moving away from the shore. So he decides to call them into the cabin below. And it's explained to him that they are handfast with witnesses. It's binding. Marcely has the contract with the witness's signature on it in her dress. And Jamie says it's not legal to the church unless they've bedded each other. He's going to send her home as soon as they can find a proper harbor and send 2 seamen to get her home to her mother. Marcely refuses. She says she wants Fergus, and she left a note saying she married him and set sail with Jamie. Oh, thank you, stepdaughter, ex-stepdaughter. Poor Jamie. Leary is going to think he did it on purpose and knew all along. So she's just going to even love Jamie even more. Turns out that Fergus had gone to ask Leary for Marcely's hand, but it went poorly. And Leary said that Fergus is a bastard and a criminal. And Jamie says, he is. And a cripple with no property either, if you haven't noticed. And Marcely simply says, I didn't care. I want him. I want him. I think this daughter of Leary is a force to be reckoned with. Jamie now tries to say she's too young. Nope, she's 15. It's normal marrying age. But Fergus is 30. Then he tries to say the voyage is too dangerous. And Marcely points out he's taking her, meaning Claire. This young woman is a firecracker. Now it's starting to get spicy, and they're starting to really fight. Jamie says Claire is not her concern. Then Marcely calls Claire an English whore and says her mother is the laughingstock of the countryside. And you have the hellish nerve to tell me what I shall do? Oh, I do like Marcely. And then they continue to argue. And Fergus tries to calm her. Then he tells her she cannot speak to my lord that way. She finally stops and listens to him. He tells her what Jamie means to him. He's more than a father. He owes Jamie his life 1,000 times. No matter how her mother feels about Jamie, he has sheltered and supported Leary and her sister and her. That she owes him respect at least. and Marcelly apologizes to Jamie. So Marcelly apologizes to Jamie, and he says he still has to send her back to her mother. She says she won't go, and if he makes her, she will tell everyone that she and Fergus had consummated their marriage. So either she'll be married or she'll be ruined. That girl drives a hard bargain. She's shrewd. Jamie acquiesces and says, fine, they will do it right and be married by a priest. And until then, they cannot share a cabin. Fergus can't touch her. Marcelly gets one more dig in on Claire and says, yes, Daddy, to Jamie. So after the distraction is over, Jamie begins to feel very seasick. But he stays on deck until the shore of Scotland can no longer be seen, in case he never sees it again. And Claire assures him he'll be back. And he thinks about it and says, you've seen my grave, haven't you? He doesn't want to know the dates. And she says there weren't any dates, just their names. It's a marriage stone. She knew it was his stone when it read, beloved husband of Claire. She says at first she was confused when she saw it, but now she understands. Okay, this is another thing to keep your eye on, is this gravestone. It might come up in the future. And Jamie takes it to mean that they are for sure going to find young Ian, because he will not ever go back to Scotland without Ian in tow. And Jamie is feeling so poorly now, he goes down below. And he and Fergus have to share a cabin, and Claire has to share with Marcelly, since Jamie's marriage edict had come down. Fergus was helping with Jamie as he vomited, and he sent Claire to bed for now. She hoped he would improve once they were out to sea, but she wasn't going to bargain on it. And then she quipped, maybe you'll feel better in the morning. And he says, or perhaps I'll be dead. Always the joker, that Jamie. And she opens the door and runs smack into Willoughby sleeping in the passageway. He wakes up, goes into Jamie's cabin, and curls up under the table, much to Fergus's horror. Poor Willoughby. He can be a bit distasteful, but everyone treats him like garbage. Claire pauses in the passageway to get that fresh air, and she listens and acquaints herself with the varying noises of the ship. This is her way of acclimating herself. She's taking in the surroundings. This is what she does with nature, and this is what she's doing on this ship. When she gets into her cabin, she finds Marcelly sound asleep. And then Claire starts thinking that she feels a bit badly for Marcelly, because this is not how she could have been imagining her wedding night, sleeping in a cabin with Claire and not with Fergus. And it was so cold that Claire had to get into her berth fully dressed, and then she sleeps. In the morning, we get her perspective on the ship. It's tidy, but there are 32 men and 2 women crammed into an 80-foot long and 25-foot wide ship that's filled with cargo. Hygiene is bound to suffer. So day 2, Claire's already flushed a rat that she found when she went to retrieve her large medicine box. And when she used the lantern, because she heard scurrying noises, she saw dozens of cockroaches. Ugh. That sounds highly unpleasant. She talks about the head, which is what we would call the bathroom or a water closet. There's one on each end of the ship, and they're very small, and they're strategically placed boards with the slot in between suspended over the waves 8 feet below. So the user of the head would likely get an unexpected dash of cold salt water at some inopportune moment. And she figures this is why they're all so constipated besides the diet. They don't like getting cold seawater on their bum. Oh, that is quite a visual. That would make you kegel real quick, wouldn't it? And she was assured that the decks were cleaned daily, the brass was polished, and everything made ship-shape. But she doesn't think that can disguise the fact that 34 people in a small space, with only one who bathed. No, it doesn't disguise it. They're all stanky. I mean, the 18th century smelled way bad compared to now anyway, but that's not a great ratio. 33 to 1. Knowing this about the crew and about how things worked, she was surprised when she went to the ship's galley for boiling water. This galley was pristine and bright. There were well-shelved bottles of various herbs and spices. The knives and accoutrements shone beautifully, and the set itself could handle taking down a large animal or breaking down a large animal. She noticed that the pots were scrubbed bright, and she noticed there was a quantity of fresh foods, and in the midst of this glorious place, the cook was surveying her. And all he says is, "Out." She introduces herself. "Out." She tells him what she needs. "I am Aloysius O'Shaughnessy Murphy, ship's cook, and I require you to take your feet off my fresh-washed deck. I do not allow women in my galley." He glowered at her. He was short and stout with a wooden leg. She stepped out into the passageway and said he may send up the hot water to her. He might or might not, as he took a cleaver to some mutton. She thought as she watched him, he was using herbs and onions, and the captain obviously ate very well, unlike the crew. And this cook knew what he was doing. So Claire peeks back in and gives a list of ingredients she has to barter. And he thoughtfully looks at her, eyes gleaming at the ingredients. And he pauses. "You'll find a mat just outside, Mum. Should you care to wipe your boot and come in?" Clever Claire! She made a friend in this crotchety Murphy. And this makes me reflect on the interview I did earlier this year with Teresa Carl Sanders of Outlander Kitchen, when I asked her who she was most like, and she said she's like Murphy. That's the kind of cook she is. And she'll make you get out of her kitchen. So every time I read about Aloysius, I think of Teresa. Thanks. So Claire took that boiling water and cleaned the head to the best of her ability, and then she went to go clean herself up before lunchtime. Marcelly wasn't there. No doubt she was with Fergus. Claire proceeds to rinse her hands with alcohol and brushes her hair, and then she's going to go look in on Jamie. She's wondering if he's eaten or drank anything. She describes the size of the cabins and the contents. They were quite small. Jamie was crammed into a berth on his side, knees drawn up. His color was awful. Though the seas were calm, he was no better. He couldn't much keep his eyes open. He remarks about maybe being dead by morning, and she thinks it's from the seasickness, and remarks nobody dies from that. He tries to tell her something important, but he is so weak and ill. He tells her to ask Fergus and say Innes is all right. She is thoroughly confused by this, and he says, "Innes, he cannot be the one. He does not mean to kill me." And then she tries to get more information from him, and he sends her away to ask Fergus. And as she leaves, Willoughby says he will keep an eye on Jamie. So she finds Fergus and Marcelly up on deck. Fergus starts to talk to her, and when she asks questions, he's surprised Jamie did not tell her. She says he can't tell her, he's far too sick. And then they get into this discussion about the seasickness and how it's always bad, even though Jamie always says it won't be. And it's mind over matter. He tries to be strong and not weak in front of Fergus, even though he spent all these years with Fergus, trusted by his side. And Claire says that Jamie's a stubborn little fool. And Marcelly, hanging behind Fergus, starts to laugh, but catches Claire's eye and turns quickly away. And Claire realizes that Jamie will still only show her his weakness willingly. Put that in the plus column for Claire. So Fergus delves into the several incidences that have occurred where Jamie has narrowly escaped death. Once he covers several of them, he brings up the man Willoughby shot at Madame Jean's. And that pamphlet that he has in his pocket, Jamie actually printed. A customs man should not be able to know that Jamie Roy and Malcolm the printer are the same person. So Claire hones in on the fact that this is the other reason why Jamie thought leaving Scotland for France for a while was a good idea, and that's beyond Leary's comfort. Claire is relieved it wasn't her return that sent him. Claire is relieved it wasn't her return that sent him into exile, and that though her return did hasten the Leary issue, it would have happened anyway. They don't know who betrayed Jamie. They think it's one of the 6 men that Fergus gathered up and brought on board. But it couldn't be Innes because he's one-armed, and he couldn't have caused some of these accidents. And before this, the smugglers didn't know Jamie's real name, but he's going by Mr. Fraser on the ship. So even more reason to find out who's trying to kill him. Marcelly was staring out to sea during most of this discussion, ignoring Claire's presence. But Claire, noticing that Marcelly shivering, whether it's from the knowledge that there's danger here or the fact that she's cold, she wants Fergus to take Marcelly below and says she won't be in the cabin for quite a while. She's heading to see if Cook has any remedies for this seasickness. So Murphy takes it as his professional challenge of getting Jamie to keep something down, but nothing so far has worked. And we get these great descriptions of the food. It's wonderful. And though there aren't any storms right now, the seas were still high due to winter winds. And that could be really affecting Jamie at this point. He is showing no signs of getting better. He has a putrid color, and he is in his berth being watched over by Fergus and Willoughby in shifts. He's still throwing up and dry heaving constantly. And on a high note, the 6 smugglers have made no moves to harm him. So Claire takes this time to explore the ship and wander around, and she's attending to the small medical emergencies that happen. And when Claire woke in the morning, Marcelly was gone. And when Claire returned to the cabin in the evening, Marcelly was asleep. And the only time they were generally together was during meals, and Marcelly was silently hostile toward her. Claire thought in part it was because of Leary, Marcelly's mother, and in part that she's sleeping in the same cabin as Claire and not with Fergus. And then Claire thinks if Marcelly had remained untouched, then it was Fergus honoring Jamie's wishes, as Jamie couldn't do anything about it if they were bedding each other. Jamie has still kept nothing down that Murphy has prepared, and Murphy was taking this as a challenge to his skills. He was known as the best ship's cook in Le Havre. Jamie has been prostrate for 4 days, and it's an affront to Murphy. He keeps trying to come up with options. He wants to win the seasickness battle. Maybe it's like beating Bobby Flay. And so he comes up with this concoction of hardtack, water, and a gherkin. I love Murphy's tenacity. He's taking this very seriously. Claire finds Willoughby watching over Jamie. As she steps into the cabin, it's dark and dank and stinky. The window's covered, so she pulls off the makeshift curtain and tries to wake Jamie up and get him to eat. And she's acting happy and spry and bubbly. And he looks worse than ever, and he refuses. And Claire tries humor, showing him that he's supposed to suck on the gherkin. It doesn't work. She tries to make conversation and to speak to him in a soothing way like she did with patients sometimes. She's getting into her holistic mood and holding his hand and speaking all calm and wanting him to go to his happy place. And he says, "Sassenach, go away." What? Go away, he repeated very gently. Or I shall break your neck. Go away now. So Claire asks Willoughby if he has his healthy balls, because she wants to hit Jamie on the head with them. And then Jamie starts dry heaving again. Claire says, "Bloody man." And then Willoughby is trying to figure out what Chinese zodiac symbol Jamie is born under. This is a good tension breaker here. And then Willoughby asks Claire what year Jamie was born. 1721. And he says he does have medicine for the sickness, but Jamie won't allow it. And then he and Claire go into this shtick to get Jamie to do it. They go on and on about how bad retching is for a person, to the point where they finally get to him where the testicles can become entangled. And if that happens, the only thing to do usually is to amputate before the gangrene sets in. They totally heap it on, heavy and loudly on Jamie. And when they finished, Willoughby is like hissing out with a flourish. And then they wait. "Damn the pair of you," said a deep Scottish voice in tones of extreme malevolence. "Come in then." I love this scene. I think this is my favorite scene between Claire and Willoughby, where he catches on to what she's doing and they have this banter. This is the best moments between them. Later on, Fergus and Marcelly are on deck and they're in a romance cover pose. His hand is about her waist and her long hair is flying in the wind. Then they hear footsteps and Fergus looks and then crosses himself. And then Marcelly emits a shrill scream while Fergus's mouth is agape. "Da, what happened to you?" "It's all right. It's only rubbish of the Chinese to cure the puking." And there were gold needles protruding from behind his ears, inside his wrists, inside his legs, above his ankles. He feels like an ill-wish doll, but since he hasn't vomited in 15 minutes, it must be working. And now, he doesn't feel like a gherkin yet, but he would like some ale. And Fergus takes him by the arm to get him some. And then Claire asks if she should have Murphy make him lunch. "Dinna try me too high, Sassenach. I'm no going to forget you, Ken. Tangled testicles, pah!" And Willoughby is ignoring this exchange completely, and he seems to be calculating and doing math on his fingers. Not rat, not dragon 2, Jamie born in year of ox. Claire looks at Jamie as he's walking away, his broad shoulders and red head lowered stubbornly against the wind. How appropriate. I love the image of Jamie glinting with gold needles stuck in him. It works very well. There's so much foundation that we see here. We get to see the dynamic between Marcelly and Jamie, because he'd been her stepfather, Marcelly and Claire. Clearly, it's not good right now. Marcelly and Fergus, they do have a clear relationship, and he knows how to bring her back to center. And that's really important. We get to see Claire's dynamic with the cook, with Murphy. And she's making great inroads there. We see a little bit about how the ship runs. And she's already working on the hygienic side of it to make sure if somebody is sick or not feeling well that those heads stay clean. Though the idea of having to sit on those boards and peeing, like down into the open ocean like that, you'd learn to pee real fast. And so we're getting to see all these layers being put into place, relational layers, as well as the imagery of what's going on in the story. And I think it paints a very clear picture of what life on the ship is. There's a lot of people on that boat. And if you noticed, the crew is already coming to Claire for small medical emergencies. So she's being accepted as the ship's surgeon just out of the gate without any problems or questions. And we also get to see that though Fergus and Marcelly are handfast, which is considered legally binding, they have a year to decide whether or not they're going to actually marry. And since they haven't consummated the handfasting marriage, they get to wait and sleep apart. That is no fun for either one of them, I am sure. Though the idea of losing one's virginity in a tiny berth on a ship, I don't know if that sounds fantastic. So what's coming up? Well, I would like you to join in on Twitter if you can and follow along to the chat on Wednesday nights. Please let me know if you'd like to do Facebook chats. We can also do that. It's on the Twitter chat on Wednesday night is 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, and we use the hashtag ADOO for A Dram of Outlander. And it's a fast-paced 2 hours, and we talk about the prior Saturday's podcast, those chapters. Be on the lookout for Outlander Science Club. Karen has prepared her science lesson on seasickness. And where can you find A Dram of Outlander? On Facebook, it's A Dram of Outlander page. Please go and like it. On Instagram and Twitter, it's Dram of Outlander. Of course, the website is adramofoutlander.com. You also may call in with a comment to 719-425-9444. That's the listener line. You can always send me an email to adramofoutlander@gmail.com. And if you like the podcast, if you want to support my efforts, there's a few ways that you can do that. One way that you can support the podcast is to submit a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. It will help people find the podcast, and more people can listen. The other way would be to go to patreon.com/adramofoutlander, and you can financially support the show. And I would love to be listener supported solely. That would be fantastic. And you can simply share the show when it's posted and tell people about it and listen every week and give me your feedback. I find that some of the most important support that you can give me. And I deeply appreciate you for listening and bringing others along, because when you get Outlander in your veins, you just can't get enough of it. So until next time, slán je va.